Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and this particular video is going to be a two-part video. The first part is going to be talking about what February new car sales are looking like so far, and then the second part of the video is going to be talking about the dealership service department because there have been some pretty substantial changes back there. Before we get in this video though, as always, if you're going to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. Let's start things off by talking about the new car sales forecast for February of 2023. Now, this data comes from Cox Automotive, and this is their forecast based on how many cars have been sold so far in February. They're estimating that we're going to see about 1.1 million new vehicles sold in February, which is a 3.9% increase compared to January last month, and it's a 4% increase compared to February of 2022. So on the surface, this February looks to be pretty positive for the new car industry because more vehicles are going to be sold. However, when you dive a little bit deeper into the data, it's not all good news because with the amount of cars that are going to be sold in February, again, those 1.1 million new vehicles, this actually pulls back the total amount of cars that will be sold in 2023. Down to 14.4 million new vehicles. And if you're wondering why I'm saying down, well, based on how many new cars were sold in January, the forecast was 15.7 million new vehicles. So that shows that although this February is better than last February, this February is not as strong as how strong January was compared to what it is historically and what it was compared to 2022. So the new car market has, in fact, slightly pulled back. And if you're wondering, February of 2022 had a year-over-year forecast of 13.7 million new vehicles. So again, we're in the positive direction in terms of volume, but at the same time, in the short term, we're kind of in the negative direction in terms of volume. And what Cox Automotive states in this particular report is that it appears that affordability is a huge headwind for new cars, and this is what is kind of making it so that there's a little bit of a volume pullback, and there's a lot of buyers that are shifting over into the used car market because of the affordability aspect of things. And so used cars are becoming more and more scarce, and new cars are becoming more and more available. And now diving into the service data, this is pretty fascinating. So what Cox Automotive has found is that the overall repair order volume has actually been in the decline over the last few months. So January compared to December saw a decline of 3.6%. However, if you compare the order volume of January of 2023 compared to January of 2022, the order volume is actually up by 3.4%. So that means that more people are getting their cars serviced this year compared to last year, at the beginning of last year rather. However, over the last few months, it has been in decline. And they actually have this cool little graph here, which I'll quickly show you guys. So you guys can see the whole setup here. And basically what the graph shows is that prior to the pandemic, people were getting their cars serviced all the time. The number was right around 100, if you guys are wondering in terms of the rating. And then as soon as the pandemic hit in March, the rating took a nosedive down to less than 60. I mean, you guys saw on the graph, it was that huge downward trend. And since then, it's pretty much bounced up and down between somewhere in the 90s to somewhere in the 80s. However, at the end, you guys can see that trickle downwards. Now it's back into the 80s. And so what this basically shows is that there are fewer people servicing their cars today after the pandemic than there were prior to the pandemic. However, the next data set that is interesting with this whole section is that the amount of money that people are spending at service departments has increased by a substantial margin. Just month over month, it has increased by 1.3%, and year over year, 8.4%. So if you serviced your car in January of 2022, then it would have been 8.4% less expensive than January of 2023. And so here's the next little graph so you guys can kind of see the order repair amount. Hopefully that pops up there. But basically you guys can see that prior to the pandemic, again, it was hovering right around 100. And then as soon as the pandemic hits, it just skyrockets to 110 range. And then 2022, it skyrockets to 120, and now we're over 130. And so service department costs just keep going up at the same time that volume keeps going down. now that we've gone over the data, let's talk about what this means. Now, I know that it might seem strange that I'm talking about new car sales and service department volume in the same video, but these two things are very intertwined. So I can tell you anecdotally, when I worked at the dealership, I found that the leads that I could get out of the service department were some of the best leads, because what this looks like in the real world is someone goes in to get their car serviced, maybe an oil change, tire rotation, whatever it may be. And, obviously the service department is going to try to find as much wrong with that person's car as they possibly can to try to convince them to spend more money with them. And so that means that usually what happens is someone goes in for an oil change and then they find out that they need a bunch of items fixed. And then the service department goes, well, those bunch of items that need to be fixed is going to cost this much. And the person is then put into a situation where they go, do I want to spend thousands of dollars to fix this car that I've had for however much time that's this used? Or I'm already at the dealership anyways, should I go and look at the brand new cars and get something brand new that's covered under warranty so I don't have to worry about fixing things on the car because if something breaks? Well, there's a warranty for a reason. And so, again, I can tell you anecdotally, this was just such a great source of leads at the dealership because these people were just in the right mindset. It's like, okay, well, as a salesperson, it's pretty easy sale. It's like, hey, instead of spending $4,000 with our service department, how about you instead buy this brand new car and put that $4,000 as a down payment, and boom, you're spending money paying down a brand new car that's brand new and exciting rather than spending it on parts to keep your old car running and on the road. And so if we then transition into the data that we just discussed, well, it makes sense as to why there are fewer new cars being sold. There are fewer people going in and servicing their cars right now. And so there are less new car leads for dealerships from one of the sources that is, again, in my opinion, one of the best sources of new car sales for car dealers. However, that's obviously not the entire picture, because I do need to mention that, yes, the higher interest rates, the higher prices of new vehicles, and the decline in wholesale prices with used vehicles is all something that is going to impact new car sales, because, well, if people want to trade in, well, their vehicle's not worth nearly as much as what it was just a few months ago. If people are looking to finance, well, they're gonna have to spend a lot more money on the financing. And then, well, if they want to buy a new vehicle, it's a lot more expensive to buy a new vehicle today than what it was, again, even just a few months ago. Like, vehicle prices have gone through the roof. So yes, those factors are also impacting new car sales, but again, like I just stated, I do believe that this whole service department volume decrease is also another big contributing factor. So then that leads us to ask the question of, why is service volume declining? And I think that it's pretty obvious. Again, the data showed that the amount of money that people are spending on average at the service department has increased by a massive amount. And so there are plenty of situations where people are just holding off from servicing their vehicle or just not servicing it altogether because of the cost to service vehicles today. And I want to give you some real life examples in terms of rates that I have seen out there prior to the pandemic and then compared to today. So with most non-luxury stores prior to the pandemic, it was pretty common to see an hourly service rate of somewhere in the $80 to maybe over $100 per hour range. Whereas in today's world, it's pretty typical to see a service rate in the $150 to sometimes even over $200, again, for non-luxury cars in terms of the service labor rate. Again, it's going to depend dealership to dealership, brand to brand. And then if we go over to the luxury car side of things, prior to the pandemic, you could easily see luxury car service rates under $200. Some of them were in the $200, maybe $300 per hour range, but those are typically, the really high-end, high line. So think like your Porsche, Ferrari, and stuff like that. But in today's market, it's pretty standard to see luxury car dealers with service rates well over $200, even well over $300, sometimes even $400 per hour. Again, depending on the dealership, depending on the brand. And so with these huge increases in terms of the amount of money that dealers are charging per hour to service cars, it makes sense as to why people are being a lot pickier about, what they're servicing and when they're servicing. So in summary, January 2023 was a really strong sales month for the automotive industry, and February is better than January. but it's not good enough to set us on track to have a year that was quite as good as what everyone was thinking. And so it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues or if this is just a downwards blip before, again, the tax season, the spring selling season, to where things will just skyrocket out of control. And then maybe we'll have a record year in terms of car sales, compared to what we've seen over the last couple of years with the pandemic. And a big part of why this is happening is because there are fewer people visiting dealerships, because there are fewer people getting their cars serviced because of how expensive car servicing is. And something that'll be interesting to see with this whole situation is how this will affect the used car market. Because if you have people that are either using third-party shops that are less expensive, that are less specialized to service their cars, or just not servicing their cars in general, this will obviously lead to less reliability with these cars, which means that we might see more used cars, which could obviously put even more downward pressure on the market, or we might just see, well, frankly, I think that's pretty obvious, we might just see crappier used cars on the market with a lot of problems because people aren't servicing them. And so then it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Obviously, I will continue to follow the data because I will, regardless of whether or not I make videos, because I find it interesting. Let me know what you think about this whole situation, and let me know if you got some sticker shock when you visited the service department for an oil change and found out that it was way more expensive than you thought. See ya.